All right, let's get to what I think is the most fun part of astrology, and definitely the most interesting, and that is the aspects. So we've talked about three of the first levels of astrology, and there are four. We've talked about the planets and how all of them represent a particular character, a particular chapter of your behavior, if you will. We talked about the signs and how the signs give a certain personality to those chapters of your behavior. We talked about the houses and how the houses basically tell you the area of your life where those chapters with those characters are more likely to play out. But what we haven't talked about is how these things come together. Because if you think about it, there's no planet of self-contentment. There's no planet of having a destiny to be a rebel. There's no planet of finding the love of your life. There's a planet for how you express deep bonds, and there's a planet for searching for things and making meaning. But there's no planet for actually making the meaning of your deep bonds. And so what do you do? What do you do when you want to learn how to combine planets together? Well, you look at the aspects. You look at the angles between planets. Okay, now in my three books, Full Spectrum Astrology, Hayden's Book of Synastry, and all 144 aspects, I attempt to explain how this might work. It's mathematical, and it has to do with trig, but the point is that the angles of separation between your planets tell you everything about those events in your life which are most likely to bring out certain combinations of planets. So let me give you an example. Down here, we have Hidalgo, the planet of attention getting, and we have the North Node, the planet of destiny. And when you put the two together, you basically get a destiny to get attention. Okay, well, when does that happen? Because they're right next to each other, this is considered a conjunct in basic astrology. And a conjunct means that it naturally comes out. So this individual naturally gets attention. But this individual also has some other natural characteristics. So for example, Sedna. Sedna is the salience of the body presence, or the salience that is the standout nature of the individual's presence. And the midheaven is their reputation. So they have a reputation for standing out naturally. This one says that the public image and contrariety, rebellion, also go together because they're right next to each other. So this individual, so I've given away several times, by the way, that this individual is an it, and it's not a he or she. It's actually an event. So if you're wondering why sometimes I say he, sometimes I say she, and sometimes say it, it's because this is the chart of an event. It's actually not a person's chart. So just, excuse my mixture of pronouns. Well, now that you know that, I can consistently refer to it as an it. So this thing naturally gets attention, and it's naturally known to stand out by reputation. It has a reputation for being a rebel, and it tends to draw out the workings of its friends in a sophisticated setting. And that's true if you knew what this was the chart of. But the point is that being right next to each other, close to 0 degrees of separation, is an angle. And things that are right next to each other are said to be conjunct in angle. But the conjunct is not the only angle that you have. Sometimes you have stuff which is separated by, say, opposition. So if you take a look at this one, you see this brown line here. We've got Saturn and we've got Jupiter opposite each other. A conjunct is basically 1/1 of a circle. And so it's a lot like Aries. And opposition is 1/2 of a circle. So it's a lot like Taurus. And so that means that things in opposition tend to compare against each other. This individual seems to compare its reputation against the limits of its reputation, and that tends to lead to a balanced style of self-promotion. Balanced self-promotion is what Jupiter and Saturn together actually represent. I have a whole huge table of combinations for every pair of planets, by the way, that's mentioned in here except for the anti-planets in the second and the third books that I wrote. Jupiter, Saturn represents balance, self-promotion. But the way that it promotes itself is basically by balancing what it's doing in the faceless public against what that faceless public says. So in opposition, 180 degrees compares two planets. A conjunct makes the two planets come together naturally. A trine, see this green one here? This is 1/3 of a circle. It's 120 degrees, and 1/3 of a circle is like the third sign, Gemini. How do we know this? Statistics. If you just do them, you'll see that that's how that works. And here we see that Saturn is trine this bunch over here. I have to look at the degree. Look at that. It's the end of Libra, end of Libra. So apparently Saturn is trine Neptune. Saturn is the planet of restriction and limits. Neptune is the planet of vibes. So Saturn-Neptune in angle shows that when this thing is contributing its opinionation, just like the third sign, right? That's what trines are going to do. When this thing is expressing its opinion, it's doing so in a spacey but limiting way. It turns out that Saturn-Neptune, by the way, is associated in negative cases with addiction and doing drugs, because you've got the space, the spacey behavior, and then you've got the restrictions for the person who's displaying that behavior, and there you go. But that's in negative cases. In positive cases, it basically just means that the individual can put some interesting kinds of abstract restrictions on things as it communicates. So if you look at these angles, you'll see that they basically draw out meanings at different times. Notice that because Saturn and Neptune are not right next to each other, this event doesn't naturally put that space on other people unless it is doing so from its own opinion. But if it's keeping quiet, you won't see this. The angles basically tell you when you show certain behaviors. And so the major angles tend to be these. If you study astrology, you have heard of these at least. Conjuncts are 0 degrees of separation. Oppositions are 180 degrees. Trines are 120. Squares are 90. Septiles are 60. And inconjuncts and semisextiles are 150 degrees and 30 degrees respectively. Now this is standard astrology, and if you go anywhere and you print out your astrology chart with the aspects in them, you'll find that these tend to be the angles that are shown. There is a slight problem with this though. The problem is that not every angle is covered. So let me show you what I mean. If I want to know, for example, when I'm able to show a kind of blessed talent for influencing people, I would really love to see the angle between Mars and Selene. Where is it? It's nowhere. And the reason it's nowhere is because it's not one of those major divisions of a circle. So if you want more detail in angles like this, then you have to go a little bit higher. This is 1/1 of a circle, conjuncts. This is 1/2. This is 1/3, 1/4, 1/6. Where's 1/5? What does 1/5 of a circle do anything? It does. And when you do the stats on it, you see that 1/5 does something, 1/7, 1/8, 1/9, 1/10, and 1/11 all do something as well. And that gets you to the whole basic family of 12 angles. Here we have the same stuff. You've got conjuncts showing natural behavior, and oppositions showing when values are compared, and trines showing inner thoughts or opinionation, just like Gemini. Septiles, just like Libra, show one-to-one feedback or one-to-one conversation. And then there are others. Squares show wanting or discontent. Quintiles show attention gathering and fun. Stuff that is in quintile, by the way, tend to be fun sides of your personality. They just come out when you're youthful, and they come out when you are full of charisma, but on the negative end, they can also come out when you're childish. I had quintiles indicated in red, and this is a strong quintile here because it's pretty thick. So if you look at this, you'll see that Mercury is quintile Jupiter. And Mercury quintile Jupiter is something like meaning-making in a way that projects the public image, but it's also meaning making or finding common ground in a way that makes this individual a rebel. This actually may make this individual either funny or entertaining, or at the very least have their thoughts be aired as an integral part of their personality. Now, you may have noticed that as I read the aspects, the interpretations of this chart get a lot deeper than the previous 3 recordings that I've put down, and that's because we're now combining planets. If you want to know some really complicated stuff about yourself, then you really need to start studying the aspects. The houses and the planets and the signs by themselves don't really tell you anything. Well, they tell you something, but they don't tell you nearly as much. So if we go back to this, we can see that you've got different families of angles. Now, I use the practice of naming entire families based on one of the angles. So for example, although there are 5 kinds of undecile, I only basically say that if you are a multiple of 1/11th of a circle, you are an undecile. So 1/11th of a circle, by the way, is about 32 degrees, 32 to 33 degrees. But you can also have 2/11ths of a circle, and that's about 65 degrees. Or 3/11ths of a circle, and that's 98 degrees. It doesn't matter. They all have the character of the undecile. They are a little bit different because 32 is near some other angles that differ from 65's neighbors. But in general, the undeciles all behave in the same way, the same basic way. Some are more public than others, some are more stressful than others. And so for those people who are familiar with this as being the symbol for an angle called the semi-square, and they're saying, where's the sesquiquadrate? Both semi-squares and sesquiquadrates are classified as octiles. Now, if you're not familiar with this, don't worry about it. The point is that 1/8 of a circle as a family is called an octile. 1/9 of a circle as a family is called a novile, and so on and so forth. And you can see all their meanings, by the way. So if people are asking about being talked about, and they want to know about their reputation on the grapevine, they'll tend to look at undeciles, because this is where you're surrounded by social information. If they want to know about the image they project in the world and what they should do as faces among strangers, they'll tend to look at noviles. If they want to know about their creativity or the vibe they leave or sickness or some other stuff where it's just kind of a mood floating around you, then they will look at inconjuncts. And when you put all of this stuff together, you basically are able to read a full chart. So these are the basic 12 angles, and let me move forward here, and you can see that when you read these basic 12 angles, you can basically put together any combination of planets in here, and this will allow you to read your whole chart. Let me just end by showing you something else. As you can see, there are some angles that are missing here. Like I don't have a Hera Varuna angle, which is shown, and that's because the Hera Varuna angle isn't one of the main ones that pops up in the 12. But I'll get to that in a second. Let's say that you don't care about Hera Varuna, you just care about all this stuff, but you get a chart like this and you're not really able to separate everything. You're like, I don't know what all this is. I would really love a neat way of looking at this. Well, when you print out your astro chart in many programs out there, lots and lots of programs out there, you don't just have wheel view, but you can also do table view. And table view basically takes every pair of these here and puts their symbol down. So for example, we had a Jupiter-Mercury quintile, but it doesn't say that it's a quintile right here. And we had a Jupiter-Saturn opposition, but it doesn't say that it's an opposition. But if you print out table view, you can see, oh, here we go, a Jupiter-Mercury quintile, specifically a biquintile. And here we have a Jupiter-Saturn opposition. There it is. If you're really going to do some deep reading of your astrology chart, you're going to live in this version of the chart rather than this version. This version is neat looking, But as you add more planets, it just gets crowded and you can't read anything. So you'll find that you actually want to read this. And in reading this, you can see all kinds of stuff. So for example, I can see that if I'm using my Mars to steer people, there we go, and I'm using my Jupiter to make a public image, then I have a public image for steering people. And so people tend to think of me as resolute. And in fact, the Jupiter-Mars combination, planetary combination, indicates resolve, how resolute you are. When is this individual most resolute? They're most resolute here with an octile, and that's here, when they're influencing people, when they're steering things. This symbol, by the way, is a symbol for the sesquiquadrant, which is a member of the octile family. I actually have this all in detail in the book, but you can go on the internet and just find some of these other symbols that aren't there. But these are the family symbols, and these are the specific symbols, so they're a little bit different sometimes. Now, let me read one more. This this event here has a Sun for one-to-one interaction and a Pluto for being socially pressured to do that one-to-one interaction together. So it is natural that this person has a strong, or that this event has a strong constitution. And that's what it is. This is a strong constitution, or a kind of inner power. Now, after looking at all of this stuff and being able to read it, I said, that's cool. And you may say this too. I like that I can really just read my personality deeply through all of this, but I don't like the fact that there's nothing here. And I didn't either. So what I ended up doing in full spectrum astrology is basically some work to determine not just what 1/1, 1/2, 1/3, 1/4, 1/5, and so on do, but I also did the research to see what 1/13th, 1/14th, 1/15th, 1/16th did. And then I just started over and over. So 1/13th of a circle wraps around, and instead of being a conjunct, it would be called a 2 conjunct. And if you add 12 again, you get 1/25th, and that would be a 3 conjunct. You just keep adding 12, and then you keep adding levels, and they all do stuff. In the first 2 books, I only went up to 36, but in all 144 aspects, I went up to all 144. Again, that's talked about in the book. But the point is, when you fill in all 144 aspects, you could actually read this person's self-contentment, because sun and moon together shows your self-contentment. And here, there's no angle that is among these that does that. But when you read the full chart, you're able to see that this is a level 6 septile. And off the top of my head, I do not remember what that is, because there are 144 of these. So you tend to have to use a table in order to interpret the really, really deep stuff. But yeah, once you have the aspects, you can read when you are most self-contented, or when you are most direct. Sun and Mercury together show your directness. And all of these pairs, any 2 of these together, is going to have an occasion for it coming out in your chart. But that's far beyond the subject of Astrology 101. If you are interested in learning more about astro stuff, then you can get your chart from astro.com and print it out. It's free. Just sign up. For learning astrology, I really like these 2 sites. Years and years ago, I learned most of my early astrology from bobmarksastrologer.com and astrologynumerology.com. And if you want a big table of a whole bunch of random asteroids, then you can go to serenu.com, and they will display some stuff for you. That's it.